to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. A very disgruntled Tszyu says, Canelo has taken what I wanted, so he's part of that hit list now.
Highlighting that before CaneloCharlo signed on to take on Canelo Alvarez, he was supposed to be taking on Tszyu. In truth, Jermell made the same decision that any fighter would have made in that situation. The Canelo fight gets you more money.
It does.
A lot more money.
Can't say that I've been castigating him for it, but Tszyu, he feels raw about it.
He's angry.
I'm even angry at Canelo, Tszyu said to Fox Sports Australia. He's taken what I wanted, so he's part of that hit list now as well. I'm going to be like John Wick. Call me John Wick from now on. At the moment, Tszyu is ready to face all comers at 154 and then plans to pursue big fights at middleweight at 160. He's open to the scenario of facing Charlo with no world titles at stake. Wherever the big fights are, I've got 3, maybe 4 fights at super welterweight. Whatever gets the most attention, then move up. So we'll see how long I stay in this division. At the end of the day, it's all about creating highlight reels that live on through eternity.
Of all the junior middleweight up-and-comers that are coming through, Tszyu really is one of the brighter ones with legitimate star power. It's really between him and Puerto Rico's own Xander Zayas.
Very soon he could see himself either elevated to full WBO champion via his interim status, or he may get to fight for the newly vacated title. The WBO has not vacated the title yet.
But it's only a matter of time because the order for Jermell to take on Tim, it already came down. And the WBO, they already know he's not going to. So it's only a matter of time.
Make a decent amount of money and make friends and family around you proud. When I first came into this sport, it was belts, this and that. But my mentality has changed. Belts won't define me. What will define me is highlights, the legacy that I keep making. And while belts are part of that, I'll fight Mel for belt or no belt. I don't care. Belts are just nice little prizes to have.
Had Charlo not moved up in weight and gone through with the fight with Tim would have had the chance to fight for all the belts, all the nice little prizes at 154. So as you can imagine, he feels slighted. He feels raw about that.
Silver lining is that he may yet get the chance to at least collect the WBO title, to see himself crowned a champion at junior middleweight. I do think his future lies at junior middle and middle.
I think Tim can do all right for himself north of 154.
The junior middleweight division has a decent talent pool. You have to think about it. Names like Tszyu, Xander Zayas, Charles Conwell. I believe that very soon Virgil Ortiz may be heading to 154, it having become unsafe for him to keep boiling down to 147. At some point, Jaron Boots Ennis is going to move up as well. Maybe not in the near future, but at some point he will. So 154 has a decent talent pool. Better than the middleweight division. Better than 160. 160...
It could use some fresh new blood, some fresh new faces. Though in truth, I don't think Tim is there yet. I don't think he's going to be moving up in the immediate future.
But I could see him at some point moving up there and creating waves. In reference to this upcoming weekend's fight, the Spence versus Crawford fight, and how I feel that Terrence Crawford's going to win that fight. I feel like Terrence Crawford may end up stopping Errol Spence Jr., and if he does, he's not going to stay at welterweight. He's going to move up in weight. He might. And if he does...
Use your head.
Use it.
If Terrence knocks out Errol Spence Jr., Errol has approximately 30 days to activate his rematch clause. If Terrence stops him the way I think he's going to stop him, he don't activate that rematch clause. He takes some time off. Maybe he comes back in 6 months to a year, comes back as a junior middle, but essentially I'm not expecting a second fight.
The only way I see a second fight taking place, a rematch clause being activated, is if Terrence loses a decision. But if Terrence wins, and if he wins the way I think he's going to win, there ain't going to be no rematch.
Errol will take some time off to recuperate, enjoy some of the money he's made. Terrence Crawford, he may vacate all the titles at 147 to move up to 154.
If he were to move up to 154, beyond a Spence fight, in a scenario where he wins, one of the biggest names at 154, if not the biggest name at 154, is Tszyu. In the absence of CaneloCharlo, that division's reigning undisputed champion, the next big thing, the next big name, is the name of Tszyu.
Not very many, if any, of these other fighters at 154 draw domestically how Tim Tszyu draws domestically. They're not drawing here in America what he's drawing in Australia.
Don't let American xenophobia cloud your judgment. When Sebastian Fundoria took on Brian Mendoza and got stopped, he didn't get stopped in front of a whole lot of people. If you looked out into the crowd, there were not that many people there because Sebastian Fundora, he ain't got that much marquee value, and neither does the man who knocked him out, Brian Mendoza.
They don't draw in America what Tim Tszyu draws in Australia.
Neither does Charles Conwell or Puerto Rico's own Xander Zayas. Now, Xander has the look. He's got the ability. He's got earning potential, but he doesn't yet have earning power. In time, so long as he stays in character, keeps fighting, and keeps winning, he could go on to become one of the bigger names anywhere between 154 and 160, but he's not there yet. He's not doing here what Tim Tszyu is doing there.
He isn't. That's the truth.
So in many ways, Tim Tszyu has more marquee value than many of the other junior middleweights, and very soon he could see himself crowned WBO champion. You want to pay attention to that because what Terence Crawford can do, if he wins, is use his WBO super champion status to move up in weight and become Tim's mandatory straight away, to become a 5-division champion.
See if he can.
It's the same thing he did with Jeff Horn when he moved up from 140 up to 147 and became Jeff's mandatory straight away. He can do the same thing with Tim if he wins this weekend, and I think that's a distinct possibility.
Tim Tszyu was a fighter that felt he was ready for the likes of a CaneloCharlo, an undisputed champion.
You have to figure that if he was ready for the likes of a CaneloCharlo, he may be ready for the likes of a Terence Crawford, an accomplished fighter, very much accomplished, but still a smaller fighter who is moving up in weight. Crawford versus Tszyu may become a conversation.
All Crawford's got to do is seal the deal this weekend, and we'll see what happens.
Terence Crawford is a potential target for Tim Tszyu, but it's not just Terence Crawford. It's also the winner of this fight, the winner of Liam Smith versus Chris Eubank Jr. at middleweight, which has been set for September 2nd in Manchester. Things having not worked out between Chris Eubank and Conor Benn. Conor, who still has yet to clear himself with UCAD.
There were talks about them revisiting that fight for some weeks, but they didn't materialize. This did.
The rematch between bitter middleweight rivals Liam Beefy Smith and Chris Eubank Jr. has a new date, with the two now set to collide in the AO Arena, Manchester on Saturday, September 2nd. Airing live and exclusively on Sky Sports Box Office, the pay-per-view event will bring the heated rivalry to a conclusion 9 months after their first encounter. It took them 9 months to finally get the rematch down.
You know, Chris Eubank Jr. was enthralled in talks to take on Conor Benn, but that didn't happen.
Smith and Eubank first fought in January, meeting in the middle of the ring for a firefight which lasted just 1 minute into the 4th round before Smith secured victory with a stunning pair of knockdowns. Chris Eubank Jr., up until that fight, had a reputation for having one of the better chins in the men's middleweight division, perhaps not having the ceiling of some others. That was one area where Chris seemed very strong in.
Yeah.
He could take a punch.
Seems like that guy's chin just evaporated overnight.
Likely a byproduct of having to make the weight for what was supposed to be the Conor Benn fight last year.
And going straight into another camp for a Liam Smith fight, perhaps Chris left too much of himself in the gym.
Upset at the referee's intervention and determined to avenge the defeat, Eubank Jr. activated the rematch clause and went into a protracted training camp focused on handling a loss to the Liverpool man Smith. With a prior date having been postponed due to Smith suffering a minor injury in training camp, the rivalry has reached new heights with each passing month.
I could see the winner of this fight fighting Tim Tszyu.
I'm glad that the date is set now and we can look forward to getting rid of this itch that needs scratching. I'm fully healed up now, injury-free, and I'm looking forward to finishing Chris Eubank Jr.'s career on September 2nd, said Smith.
You often hear me say that rematches are usually often won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments, and I'm not completely sure that's Liam Smith.
Of the two, wouldn't you say that Chris Eubank Jr. is actually the more cerebral fighter of the two and the more athletically gifted fighter? Chris Eubank, who said, no more excuses, no more postponements, Smith can't run forever, September 2nd is the day of my revenge.
That's rich coming from him. Wasn't he talking about fighting Conor Benn instead of doing this?
For what reason would Liam Smith have to run from this rematch? What the hell's he got to be afraid of in Chris Eubank Jr.? When you think about how the first fight ended, Never mind what might happen in the second, pay attention to the first. Why would Liam be afraid of Chris Eubank?
Chris is just talking because he's got a mouth.
I think Chris is only fighting this guy because things didn't work out with Conor. If they had, he would have got a bigger payday in Saudi Arabia for that fight than perhaps what he stands to make for this one. But things didn't work out with that fight, so here we are. He's fighting Liam for a second time, and the question is, who can make the necessary adjustments in a rematch to win it?
Is it Chris or is it Liam? Liam Beefy Smith strikes me as a gutting and gritty, mid-range to inside fighter, mid-range to inside brawler, a crafty brawler, but still a brawler.
I feel like Chris is more cerebral and the more athletic fighter of the two, lighter on his feet.
Don't misunderstand me. I can't fucking stand Chris Eubank Jr., but
liking a guy and not liking a guy doesn't even come into it. Which one of these two guys can make the necessary adjustments to win the rematch? Because rematches are often won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments. And I like Beefy, but I'm not sure he's that guy.
he's a brawler.
Sometimes it works for him, sometimes it doesn't, but that's what he is. He's a mid-range to inside brawler. A crafty one, but a brawler still.
This is intriguing.
Because even if Chris Eubank Jr. does seem a tad bit more capable of making adjustments for a second fight than Liam does, what exactly has Chris done in between the first fight and now?
Nothing. He hasn't done anything.
And when you think about him revisiting talks for a Conor Ben fight in between the first fight and this fight, that kind of communicates that he wasn't all that concerned with getting his revenge. He wasn't all that...
He wasn't that committed.
Didn't really want his lick back if he was entertaining a fight with Conor Ben. So it's intriguing. This fight, this rematch is very much intriguing, even though there's no title on the line. And as stated, I could very much see Tszyu potentially fighting the winner of this fight at middleweight.
The winner of this fight will have more of a profile in the United Kingdom than, say, Sebastian Fundora or Brian Mendoza in the United States, Charles Conwell.
Those guys don't draw nothing out here. I'm trying to tell you, they don't. But the winner of this fight actually has a profile in the United Kingdom. You consider that Tszyu was willing to travel to America, to Minnesota of all places, at the Armory, for Terrell Gausha.
That guy ain't got no profile. If Tim was willing to travel for that guy, I think that Tim would be willing to travel for the winner of this fight, for one of these guys.
I don't see why not. It always seemed strange to me that Tszyu made his U.S. debut for a guy like Terrell Gausha. God bless him. That guy ain't got no profile out here. He don't draw nothing.
I honestly think Ben Shalom and Boxer would offer Tszyu more money to go to the UK than what he got to come to the US.
It's just something to think on, something to think about. That the winner of this fight could also be a potential opponent for Tszyu if he decides to move up. Finally, our continued coverage of this weekend's mega match. Terrence Crawford has no plans on trying to beat Mayweather's 50-0 record. He can have that. And in truth, Mayweather's 50-0, you know, just that.
You remember it was about getting to 49-0, then 50-0.
In order to beat Rocky Marciano's record. Rocky Marciano, a heavyweight who retired with a record of 49 wins and no losses.
It was always more of a heavyweight record. Better still, Mayweather made it his mission to surpass Rocky Marciano's record.
Terrence, however, he's not interested. He said, nah, I ain't never thought of reaching 50-0, Crawford said on the CBS Sports radio show Maggie and Perloff. That's the Mayweather thing. That's his record. I commend him. He can have that. Asked if he planned to fight at least 11 more times, Crawford demurred. Not at all, he replied with a smile.
Yeah, I don't think Terrence has another 11 fights left in his career either.
Or Errol, because essentially what you're talking about is what? An average of 2 fights a year?
It would have to be. At 2 fights a year, it would take Crawford approximately another 5 years to get to 11 more fights, 10 or 11.
Terrence continued, we don't plan on this being our last fight, Crawford said. Prompted to weigh in on who he thinks is the greatest fighter of all time, Crawford pointed to Mayweather. It'd have to be Mayweather, Crawford said. Everything, not just the record, the fighting style, everything that surrounds Money Mayweather. It would have to be Mayweather.
That's what Crawford had to say about it.
No, I don't expect that either of these two fighters, either of this weekend's combatants, will be around the sport for another 11 fights. That seems like a lot.
Consider that Terrence Crawford has been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 3 years, and Errol Spence Jr. has been averaging less than that.
Only 1 fight in the last 2 years and only 2 fights in the last 3. Needless to say, 11 more. 11 more for either Errol or Terrence? That seems like a lot.
But to Terrence Crawford, His name is already up there with the all-time great welterweight fighters.
Some might disagree based on his resume, his welterweight resume so far.
Through no fault of his own, because he tried to fight Danny Garcia, he tried to fight Keith Thurman, and he wanted the Spence fight sooner.
But I can't say that based on his resume so far, his welterweight resume, that he's got one of the best welterweight resumes in the history of the sport. That seems like a stretch. The name of Errol Spence Jr. might help to get him there. My name is already up there, claimed Crawford to Ray Flores. It's just a matter of going out there and putting the cherry on top, furthering that legacy.
Terence Crawford wins this weekend. He will be remembered as arguably the best fighter of his era, or at least one of them. But he does have some stiff competition. I mean, Naoya Inoue, look at that guy. Alexander Usyk, some very dominant players, dominant fighters in the game.
Terence, to set himself apart, he's got to dominate Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence, who says, my skill set is going to overpower anything that Crawford brings.
As you all may know, I'm not convinced of that.
Spence has kept things simple. Of course, he has to acknowledge that boxing from the outside and brawling on the inside will play a part. Ultimately, according to Spence, the winner of their undisputed bout will come down to pain tolerance. And considering that he believes Crawford's punch resistance is a bit on the shaky side, Spence is convinced that he'll shine in that department. I know I can break him down, admitted Spence to a number of reporters. I know he's not as durable as me.
Question of Terence Crawford's durability. Many years ago, we saw him rocked by Igor Piskamboa all the way down there at lightweight. More recently, at least in recent years, we saw him rocked and technically dropped by Igis Kavaliauskas.
The referee ruled it a slip, but I know what I saw. Looked like a knockdown to me. In any event, Terence Crawford has been rocked once or twice, but so has Errol Spence Jr., rocked by a non-puncher with a reputation for smothering his own work in Sean Porter. He rocked him 2 times in that fight. Errol's fans like to deny it, but I know what I saw.
Caught him with a temple shot and buckled his legs, and he caught him with a body shot that made him grimace.
But Sean Porter could do that to him. What could a sharper puncher do to Errol Spence Jr.? We saw what happened in the Ugas fight. Got hit with a shot, looking for his gum shield, got sent careening into the ropes. I've mentioned that several times.
You could make an argument that either guy's been rocked before, that either guy's punch resistance is shaky, but Terence isn't the one saying that he's outgrown welterweight.
Errol is, and we know what the consequences of overstaying your welcome at a given weight is. Your punch resistance, it starts to suffer for it. Your durability. And Terence Crawford doesn't have the added wear and tear of being ejected from a Ferrari and landing on his face. He doesn't have a retina injury, or never had one.
Like the one Errol had that saw him sit out for an entire calendar year.
That while both Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. have been rocked before on more than one occasion, is Errol really the more durable fighter?
Moreover, does this fight really boil down to durability? Because one of these fighters is a bit more defensively minded than the other. One of these fighters gets hit less than the other.
It's not just durability, or the lack thereof. There is also mitigating the damage, minimizing it. And Terence is more defensively minded than Errol Spence Jr.
So, does it really come down to durability?
Or defense.